Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to my short story project. This month's short story was Cathedral by Raymond Carver, a story I'd read once before, but I reread it twice today to try to see if I could make heads or tails of it and make a video telling you about it. As almost always with these short story project videos, I'll leave a link to a PDF of the story down below, so if you want to read it and then come back and watch the video, you can, and let me know what you think. And you know, I'm probably going to need some help with this one, I think, because I think there's some ambiguity about exactly what it is that's going on in the story. So real quickly, a couple of things. I'll just kind of really go real quickly go through the plot. The story is told a first person point of view of the husband, and we don't really ever get his name, but he is married, and he and his wife are expecting a blind man that she used to work for, whose name is Robert, to come and stay at their house. Robert's wife, Beulah, has died. And he's going around visiting old friends after her death, and so he's come to visit the husband here's wife because she worked for him, and they were quite close. As a matter of fact, they were such kind of good friends in the short time which she worked for him, and what she did for him, by the way, was she read to him primarily, but they got to be such close friends that over the course of the years, I think 8 years in between when she worked for him and when the events of the story took place, they exchanged information about with one another in the form of audio tapes. They would record audio tapes to one another and then mail them to kind of keep up with where they were in their lives. So we learn this from the point of view of the husband telling the story, and he's telling really the story of this relationship between his wife and Robert. We also find out that his wife had been married before to, I believe, some kind of an officer in the Air Force or the Navy, I think, and that marriage had really damaged his wife and left her depressed. She was tired of moving around from place to place and always having to make new friends, and apparently the marriage was an unhappy marriage, and she tried to kill herself. She survived that, and then she divorced her first husband, the officer, and at some point she married the husband in this story. And we learn from him that about this friendship she had with Robert. We learn that at the end of their working relationship that she had let Robert touch her face, and kind of like what we now think about as the stereotypical blind person touching your face so they can see or have some perception of what you look like. And Robert then is coming to their house, and he's going to stay at least overnight with them. And the wife is really happy about this because her close friend is coming, and the husband is definitely not at the beginning of the story. The husband is not interested in having Robert. His prejudices are on full display. He is prejudiced and kind of freaked out about the idea of having a blind man stay in his house. When he learns that Robert's wife's name was Beulah, he immediately assumes that she was African American, and he makes assumptions like that. At any rate, Robert arrives at the house, and the three of them sit down. In the beginning, the wife is very kind of solicitous of Robert, trying to make sure he's comfortable, he has everything he needs, making sure that, you know, that he feels at home in their home, and there is some resentment from the husband about this. But as Robert and this couple sit around and talk, things begin to change. They have drinks, they have dinner, they smoke some weed, they're all sitting on the couch together. The wife falls asleep, leaving just Robert and the husband there watching a show about cathedrals, European cathedrals, and having kind of a conversation. And then the story ends with Robert trying to describe what a cathedral looks like. Excuse me, the story ends with the husband trying to describe what a cathedral looks like to Robert, and Robert saying, well, draw me a picture of one. And so the husband sits down to draw a picture of one. Robert puts his hand on the husband's hand, and he draws a picture of a cathedral. And in this way, I guess theoretically, Robert gets some idea, or is supposed to be able to get some idea, of what a cathedral looks like. And the story ends then with that. And I'm going to come back to the ending of the story because I think it's somewhat ambiguous. But there's the basic plot of the story. So there are a couple of things I think are really interesting about the story. One just has to do with the way in which the story is written. You know, Raymond Carver is kind of a disciple of Hemingway in the short declarative sentences and things like that, I think, and kind of the hard-boiled approach to fiction as well. And so he has a tendency then to write in that way. But this is a really extreme example. So in the beginning, when the husband is describing this relationship between his wife and Robert and this relationship between his wife and her first husband, he begins at least, let me see, I'm counting here. He begins at least 24 sentences in the first, 4 or 5 paragraphs, which spread over 2 or 3 pages, with she. She didn't, she saw, she phoned, she read, she helped, she, answered, she told, she, over and over again, there's this repetition. Oftentimes, it's 3 or 4 sentences in a row. Well, you can look at this one of 2 ways. If you ever had any instruction on writing, you're supposed to kind of vary the beginnings of your sentences so they don't feel repetition, so it doesn't feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again. Obviously, Carver is doing this on purpose. And I think he's doing this on purpose to establish the different parts of the story. In the part where we have all these she sentences, these 24 she sentences in less than 2.5 full pages, coming one after another, this is clearly a way, I think, of Carver communicating to us how the husband feels about the wife's prior life. The husband won't say the name of her first husband. The husband is disdainful of anything she did during that time period, her marriage, the poetry she wrote, and he's not particularly then happy about Robert either, or about all these tapes that have come up, and he is kind of making that part of the story about her, and he's telling it as fast as he can, because it's not something he values, it's not something he's comfortable with. In the middle of the story, though, Robert's there, and they sit down and they talk for a minute, and then they start drinking, and they drink a lot, and then they sit down and they start eating, and they eat a lot, and all of a sudden what had been, she did, all these she sentences are replaced by a lot of we sentences, in which we see that Robert has clearly been accepted by the husband as a part of the group. He says, we dug in, we ate, we scarfed, we didn't lack, all these we sentences. So now it's gone from him telling a story about his wife's former life to him telling a story about this kind of new group that's been created. The husband, the wife, and Robert are now we, not she, not me, not I, but we. And in a sense, what they're doing is they are communing, I think, in the most direct way possible. They're having a communion of sorts. They drink alcohol together. They eat food together. And later on, they smoke weed together. And every time they commune with one another, Robert and the husband becomes more accepting and more open to Robert and more friendly towards Robert. And so when we get close to the end of the story, it's the husband who is incredibly solicitous towards Robert. It's the husband who's always asking if he's okay. It's the husband who wants to describe what cathedrals look like to this blind man in his home. And Robert is really understanding, and when the husband gets frustrated with not being able to do this, it's Robert who comes up with the idea of drawing the picture. So the ending of the story, though, then, as confident as I am about those parts, the ending of the story, I think, is interesting. And I'm just going to read it to you. Okay? So, they've been sitting there, Robert and the husband, sitting on the floor drawing this picture of the cathedral. His wife has been more or less asleep on the couch. His wife wakes up. My wife said, "What's going on? Robert, what are you doing? What's going on?" "It's all right," he said to her. "Close your eyes now," the blind man said to me. I did it. I closed them just like he said. "Are they closed?" he said. "Don't fudge." "They're closed," I said. "Keep them that way," he said. He said, "Don't stop now. Draw." So we kept on with it. His fingers rode my fingers as my hand went over the paper. It was like nothing else in my life up till now. Then he said, "I think that's it. I think you got it." He said, "Take a look. What do you think?" But I had my eyes closed. I thought I'd keep them that way for a little longer. I thought it was something I ought to do. "Well," he said, "are you looking?" My eyes were still closed. I was in my house. I knew that, but I didn't feel like I was inside anything. It was really something. So, a couple of things about this that occurred to me. In a sense, the husband is having a similar experience that his wife had with Robert, where, the husband's wife let Robert touch her face. Well, in this way, there's this touching between Robert and the husband, and they're drawing a cathedral, both so Robert, the blind man, can get an idea of what something looks like. Well, there's then a parallel there, and obviously that meant something to the wife in the story, because she wrote a poem about it, and she and Robert remained close. And now we have the husband drawing a picture with Robert's hand on his hand, theoretically following along so we get an idea of about what a cathedral looks like. And then we have the husband having this kind of moment in which I think for the first time his eyes are open even though they're closed. He is having this experience where his life has changed. His life has become fuller. He's not experiencing something he's ever experienced before. And when you reflect then back on the story, you realize that we don't know anything about the husband. The only question that's really asked the husband is Robert at one point asked him what he does, and I think he gives an answer, and then he asks him if he likes it, and he's like, well, I don't really like it that much, and that's about it. Other than the fact that we know the husband drinks, and if you know anything about Raymond Carver, he drank a lot, and his characters have a tendency to drink a lot. There's a lot of drinking, and then there's the weed smoking that goes on. We know that he stays up late after his wife goes to bed and watches whatever's on TV until he gets too sleepy to stay awake, and then he goes to bed. We know these little things about him, but his life seems really empty. We don't see any real affection between he and his wife. We don't see any kind of fulfillment in his life. We don't see his love for what he does. He is essentially, almost like a blank canvas. And in a sense, then, that cathedral that is drawn, I think, at the end is a representation of, what is possible for the husband. And for the first time, he's looking beyond the past of others. He's looking beyond, perhaps, his own problems. Or, alternatively, maybe we're supposed to think that the husband, because through drawing this cathedral and having a similar experience to his wife, gains a greater appreciation for what he does have. That he has experienced something similar, that he has now created something of beauty, maybe like his wife's poetry related to, this interaction with this blind man named Robert. And maybe he's gaining a greater appreciation for what he has. Maybe he will put aside the pettiness and the kind of jealousy that he has about his wife's past and live his life differently and appreciate what he has more. Anyway, I am not sure that that's the correct interpretation of the story. Either one. So I really would like to hear your thoughts and what you think about this. So please leave those comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching.